Your property line is a suggestion, dear. This is for the community. The words slithered out of her mouth, each one a little venom-tipped dart of condescension, and hung in the humid Virginia air between us. I stood there on the edge of what used to be my grandfather's hayfield, the scent of freshly cut lumber and curing concrete and acrid violation in my nostrils. Before me, a nearly completed two-story clubhouse, complete with faux stone accents and a sprawling deck, sat squarely on land that had been in my family for 3 generations. And in front of that monument to entitlement stood its architect, HOA President Karen Miller, a plus-size woman in a turquoise tracksuit that strained at the seams, her arms crossed over her chest as if she were the queen of all she surveyed, which in her mind apparently included my 5 acres. She held a clipboard like a scepter, a petty tyrant in polyester, and looked at me not as a landowner, but as a minor inconvenience, a bug to be flicked off the windshield of her grand ambition. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was a physical blow, more stunning than any flashbang I'd ever encountered overseas. I had been home from my final tour for less than an hour, my duffel bag still sitting in the bed of my dusty Ford F-150, and I was already in a new kind of war zone. This wasn't about mortars and IEDs. This was a war of surveys and statutes, of audacity and attrition, and looking at the smug, self-satisfied smirk on Karen's face, I knew it was a war I had to win. If you've ever had a run-in with an HOA that thinks it owns the air you breathe, I want you to hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Share your own HOA nightmare, because believe me, misery loves company, and what I'm about to tell you is a masterclass in how to deal with a bully who thinks a binder full of bylaws makes them God. Now, where were we? Ah, yes, the moment I realized my homecoming was canceled. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the kind my drill instructor taught me to take before you squeeze a trigger, the kind that centers you and pushes the red mist of rage back from your eyes. I had spent 15 years in the Marine Corps, much of it in combat engineering and EOD, learning that patience, precision, and an overwhelming, strategically applied force were the keys to victory. Uncontrolled anger was a liability. Karen had just lit a fuse, but she had no idea she was sitting on the bomb. I gave her a slow, unblinking stare, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable for her. "Ma'am," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "this structure is on my private property." She let out a short, barking laugh. "Oh, that's what the old survey says, I'm sure. We had a new one done. Progress, you see. The community needed a gathering place, and this was the most logical spot." That was it. The lie. The casual dismissal of my family's history, of the deeds sitting in a safe deposit box, of the law itself. That was the moment I stopped seeing her as a misinformed annoyance and started seeing her as the objective. My grandfather, a man carved from granite and good sense, had left me this land with a simple piece of advice. "Son, they ain't making any more of it. You hold on to it. It's the only thing that's truly yours." He'd worked this soil, his father before him. It was part of an old farmstead that had been slowly devoured by suburban sprawl over the decades, leaving my 5 acres as an island of green in a sea of beige houses and manicured lawns that comprised the Whispering Pines development. My parcel was explicitly, legally, and historically separate. It was never annexed, never sold, never incorporated. It was mine. The first thing I did after our little chat was not to scream, not to call a lawyer, not to do anything she expected. I simply nodded, a tight, almost imperceptible motion. "I see," I said, my voice flat. I turned without another word and walked back to my truck. I could feel her eyes on my back, could almost hear the triumphant little hum she was probably making. She thought she'd won. She thought my quiet retreat was submission. She didn't know me. She didn't understand that a strategic retreat is the first step in planning a counterassault. I drove not to my small rental apartment across town, but to the county records office. The clerk, a kind older woman named Marge, remembered my grandfather. "Lord, that man loved this land," she said, her voice wistful as she pulled the old plat maps, the thick, heavy paper crinkling under her gentle fingers. There it was, clear as day. the solid, uncompromising line separating Lot 7B, the last remnant of the old farm, from the newly subdivided Whispering Pines. The documents were ironclad, notarized, and filed long before Karen Miller ever dreamed of wielding power in a cul-de-sac. Then I paid for certified copies of everything: the original deed, the plat maps, the tax records showing I, and my grandfather before me, had paid property taxes on this exact parcel for the last 75 years. This wasn't just a battle, it was a campaign. And a campaign begins with intelligence gathering. Phase 1 was complete. The enemy had revealed her position and her intentions. Now it was time to build my arsenal. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of controlled fury, transforming my small apartment living room into a command center. The certified documents from the county were laid out on my coffee table like battle plans. I cross-referenced them with the digital parcel maps on the county assessor's website, printing out satellite images and overlaying the property lines with a transparent ruler. Every angle, every data point confirmed the same immutable fact. The Whispering Pines HOA had trespassed, and not by a few feet. They had encroached nearly 150 feet into my property, seizing almost a full acre of prime, level land to build their monument to hubris. The scale of the theft was breathtaking. It wasn't an accident, it was an invasion. My next call was to a man I knew I could trust implicitly, a man whose entire professional life was about precision and irrefutable facts. His name was Dave Jensen, a retired Army Corps of Engineers surveyor who had lost a leg in Fallujah and now ran his own surveying company. We'd served in the same theater, though not the same unit, and belonged to a local veterans network that was more of a brotherhood than a club. "Jack, you old dog, heard you were back stateside," he said, his voice warm over the phone. I cut straight to the chase. "Dave, I need a surveyor, and I need it quiet." I explained the situation, the calm in my voice belying the storm in my gut. He was silent for a moment, and then he let out a low whistle. "They just built a building on your land? Without asking?" "They claim they had a new survey done," I replied. "One that conveniently gifted them my property." Dave snorted. "I'll bet they did. A $500 chop shop survey that a first-year apprentice would fail. Jack, I'll be there at dawn tomorrow. No charge for a brother. We're going to nail this down so tight not even God could argue with it." True to his word, Dave arrived the next morning before the sun had even crested the trees. He moved with a practiced efficiency, his prosthetic leg no hindrance, as he set up his theodolite and GPS equipment. I acted as his rod man, walking the lines, driving stakes. We worked in near silence, the only sounds the chirp of his equipment and the solid thud of my mallet. It was methodical, grounding work. Each stake we drove was a small act of reclamation, a quiet declaration of truth. We found the original survey markers, iron pins buried deep in the earth, exactly where the old plat maps said they would be. Dave's state-of-the-art equipment confirmed their position to within a fraction of an inch. By noon, we had a complete, legally defensible survey of my property. The clubhouse, a behemoth of vinyl siding and manufactured charm, was undeniably, flagrantly, and entirely on my land. Dave packed up his gear, a grim smile on his face. "They're toast, Jack. Absolutely, unequivocally toast. This survey is certified, stamped, and ready for court. When you decide to drop the hammer, this is your anvil." But I wasn't ready to drop the hammer, not yet. The building was, by my estimate, about 90% complete. The drywall was up, the windows were in, but the flooring wasn't down, and the final fixtures weren't installed. A premature attack would be messy. They could halt construction, lawyer up, and drag this through the courts for years, arguing over valuations and damages. No, my military training taught me to let the enemy fully commit, to overextend their supply lines and walk deep into the kill zone before springing the ambush. I wanted them to finish it. I wanted them to install the granite countertops, lay the expensive hardwood floors, and hang the gaudy chandeliers. I wanted them to pour every last dollar of their misbegotten budget into that building, to celebrate its completion, to feel the absolute triumph of their conquest. Their victory had to be total in their minds for their defeat to be absolute in reality. This required a level of patience that felt like swallowing hot coals, But I knew it was the right play. My strategy was forming. Document everything, build an ironclad case, wait for maximum commitment, and then execute a swift, decisive legal strike that would leave no room for argument. Phase 2, evidence acquisition, was well underway. Now it was time to think about the weapon I would use to deliver the final blow. My next stop was the office of Marcus Thorne, a lawyer whose reputation preceded him. He was a former JAG officer, a Marine colonel, retired, with a mind like a steel trap and a courtroom demeanor that could make a statue sweat. He ran a small private practice that specialized in property law and civil litigation, but his real passion was fighting for veterans. He was the apex predator of the local legal ecosystem, and he was exactly who I needed. I found him in a book-lined office that smelled of old leather and justice. A man in his late 60s with a ramrod-straight posture and eyes that missed nothing. I laid out my story, presenting the folder containing my grandfather's deed, the county records, and Dave's brand-new, certified survey. I spoke calmly and factually, omitting emotion and sticking to the timeline. Marcus listened without interruption, his steepled fingers resting on his chin. He examined each document with a practiced eye, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, which groaned in protest. "So the HOA president, this Karen," he began, his voice a low rumble, "she told you your property line was a suggestion?" "Her exact words," I confirmed. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Marcus's face. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a shark that has just scented blood in the water. "Oh, she is going to regret that," he said, more to himself than to me. "She is going to regret that with every fiber of her being and every dollar in her bank account." He looked at me, his eyes sharp. "Your instincts are correct, Jack. Your military mind is serving you well. Most people would have stormed in there, screaming and threatening lawsuits the first day. That's the civilian response. It's emotional, it's predictable, and it gives them time to lawyer up and muddy the waters. Your approach, letting them finish the building, is inspired. It is legally, tactically, and financially devastating." He stood up and began to pace, the energy in the room shifting from contemplative to predatory. "Here's what we're going to do. We are going to let them complete their little clubhouse. Let them hook up the electricity, the water. Let them furnish it. Let them hold their grand opening party. The more they invest, the greater the tort of conversion. Every nail they hammer, every dollar they spend on my client's land, they are just increasing the damages they will have to pay. We won't just sue for trespass. We'll sue for conversion of property, for quiet title to remove the cloud of their fraudulent claim, and for punitive damages so high it will make their eyes bleed. We will establish a pattern of malicious intent, starting with that one beautiful, arrogant quote." He stopped and pointed a finger at me. "But to do this, you need to be a ghost. You will not speak to them again. You will not answer their calls. You will install high-definition, date-stamped security cameras covering the entire area. We need a complete video record of their continued construction. Every worker, every truck, every delivery is another nail in their coffin. And you will keep a detailed log of everything." My wife, Sarah, was less enthusiastic about the strategy. When I got home that night and explained the plan, her face paled. "You're just going to let them keep building? On your family's land? Jack, that's insane. We have to stop them now." Sarah was a good person, a nurse whose instincts were to fix problems immediately, to stop the bleeding. She didn't understand the cold calculus of this kind of war. "Honey, I know it feels wrong," I said, taking her hands. "It feels like we're letting them win. But we're not. We're letting them build their own prison. If we stop them now, they'll tear down a half-finished structure and we'll get a small settlement for damages. If we let them finish, the law gives us options. We can force them to tear down a brand new $250,000 building at their own expense, or we can take ownership of the building. It's on our land. It becomes our property." Her eyes widened as the beautiful, vicious logic of the plan finally dawned on her. "You mean we could just take it?" A slow smile spread across her face, mirroring the one I'd seen on Marcus's. "Oh," she said softly. "Okay, I get it now. Let them build." With my legal counsel secured and my home front united, Phase 3 was in motion. The trap was being set. All I had to do was wait and watch, documenting every move the enemy made as they marched deeper and deeper into the killing field I was preparing for them. The waiting was the hardest part, a test of discipline that frayed my nerves. But every time I felt my resolve waver, I just pictured Karen's smug face and heard her voice in my head. Your property line is a suggestion. And my patience would return, cold and hard as steel. The next few weeks were an exercise in supreme self-control. True to Marcus's instructions, I became a ghost. I had 4 high-resolution, motion-activated cameras installed discreetly in the trees on the perimeter of my property, all feeding to a secure server. The video feed was a constant, silent testament to the HOA's escalating arrogance. I watched as flooring trucks arrived, delivering pallets of expensive-looking engineered hardwood. I watched electricians wire the building, installing recessed lighting and fancy sconces. I watched landscapers lay down pristine sod, plant ornamental shrubs, and install an automated sprinkler system, all on my land. Every day I downloaded the footage and logged the activity in a spreadsheet. Date, time, company name, and a description of the work performed. It was a meticulous, soul-crushing process, but with each entry I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. My case wasn't just ironclad anymore. It was becoming diamond hard. Karen, meanwhile, seemed to interpret my silence as surrender. Her confidence swelled into outright hubris. Having conquered what she saw as my territory, she decided to press her advantage. The first official letter arrived about a week into my surveillance. It was from the Whispering Pines HOA Architectural Review Committee, a committee Karen herself chaired. It was a notice of violation, complete with a blurry photo of the portion of my property they hadn't built on. The violation? Failure to maintain lawn to community standards and storage of a non-operational vehicle. The lawn was the wild meadow my grandfather had always kept for bees and butterflies, and the vehicle was my trusty, if slightly battered, 1998 F-150, which I had parked well within my own property lines. The letter demanded I mow the meadow and remove my truck within 7 days or face a fine of $50 per day. I laughed out loud. It was so absurd, so perfectly, predictably tyrannical. She was trying to enforce HOA rules on a property that wasn't in the HOA for violations that didn't exist, all while she was actively committing a felony on the other side of that same property. I didn't respond. I simply filed the letter in my growing evidence folder under a new tab I labeled harassment. A week later, a second letter arrived, this one informing me that my fines were now accumulating at $50 a day. A few days after that, I was working in my garage when I heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy diesel engine and the beeping of a vehicle in reverse. I walked outside to see a tow truck from a local wrecker service backing up towards my F-150. The driver, a burly man with a greasy ponytail, was just about to hook up my truck. I walked over, my arms crossed. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice dangerously even. He grunted, not looking at me. "Got a call to tow an abandoned vehicle." "This vehicle isn't abandoned," I said. "It's my truck, and it's parked on my private property. You hook up to it, and that's grand theft auto." He finally stopped and looked at me, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He pulled a work order from his clipboard. "Lady named Karen Miller called it in. Said it's an HOA violation." I just stared at him. "Does this look like an HOA to you?" "Look around. There are no other houses. This is a private lot. It is not, nor has it ever been, part of Whispering Pines. Now I'm going to tell you this once. You will get back in your truck, and you will leave my property immediately. If you don't, I'm calling the sheriff and pressing charges for trespassing and attempted theft." I pulled out my phone and held it up. The driver looked from my face to the truck, then back to the work order. He saw the clubhouse in the distance, then looked at the wild, unmanicured land where we stood. The pieces started to click in his head. He wasn't a stupid man, just a guy doing his job, but he could smell a bad situation. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble," he mumbled, shoving the clipboard back into his cab. "She said it was all clear." "She lied," I said simply. "Now get off my land." He didn't need to be told a third time. He jumped in his truck and rumbled away, leaving a cloud of diesel smoke behind. I saved the footage from my security camera, capturing the entire interaction. This was a significant escalation. Karen hadn't just sent a letter, she had actively dispatched an agent to seize my personal property. This wasn't just harassment anymore, it was attempted larceny. I sent the video file to Marcus with a simple subject line, Phase 4, Escalation. His reply was almost instantaneous. Beautiful. Just beautiful. Her overconfidence is a gift from the heavens. Keep letting her dig. The incident with the tow truck, however, had an unintended consequence. It started to attract attention. My immediate neighbor to the north, an older gentleman named Arthur, who lived in a small, non-HOA house like mine, had seen the whole thing from his porch. He ambled over later that day, a retired accountant with a sharp mind and a quiet disposition. "Saw you had a bit of excitement earlier," he said, leaning on our shared fence line. "That woman from the HOA is a real piece of work, isn't she?" I nodded. "You've had dealings with her?" Arthur let out a dry chuckle. "Dealings? Son, she's been sending me fines for the color of my mailbox for 6 months. My house isn't even in her jurisdiction. I've just been throwing the letters in the trash." This was interesting. "She's fining you too?" "Me, the Hendersons down the way. Anyone whose property borders her little kingdom. She seems to think her authority extends by line of sight." An idea began to form in my mind. Karen wasn't just targeting me. She had a pattern of abuse, of overreach, of petty tyranny against anyone who wasn't under her thumb. And a pattern, as Marcus would say, is evidence of intent. The conversation with Arthur was a revelation. I wasn't an isolated target. I was just the most flagrant example of Karen's imperial ambitions. That evening, I walked down the road to the Hendersons' house, a tidy little rambler on a 2-acre lot. Bill and Mary Henderson were in their late 60s, a retired couple who spent most of their time gardening. When I mentioned Karen and the HOA, Mary's face tightened. "Oh, that woman," she sighed, leading me into their kitchen. "She's a nightmare." Bill pulled out a shoebox overflowing with letters. "She's been fining us for our garden gnomes. Says they're non-compliant lawn ornaments. We've lived here for 40 years. Bill's father built this house. We've never been part of any HOA." The story was the same. Fines, threats, condescending letters about rules that didn't apply to them. Karen was running a campaign of intimidation against all the independent property owners on the periphery of Whispering Pines, likely in a misguided effort to bully them into annexation. She was a colonizer in a tracksuit. I told them my story. I told them about the clubhouse on my land, my quiet documentation, and my legal strategy. As I spoke, I saw a flicker of hope ignite in their eyes, replacing the weary resignation. "You mean you're actually fighting back?" Bill asked, his voice hushed with a kind of reverence. "I'm not just fighting back," I said. "I'm building a case to dismantle her entire power structure." That night, we held the first meeting of what I jokingly called the Landowners' Liberation Front. It was me, Sarah, Arthur the accountant, and the Hendersons, all gathered around my dining room table, which was now covered in maps and documents. It felt like a scene from a war movie, a small band of rebels plotting against a vastly more powerful, if incompetent, empire. Arthur, with his accountant's eye for detail, was immediately intrigued by the financial side of things. A project this size, a clubhouse, they'd have to have had special assessments, loans, construction contracts. It should all be in their monthly statements and meeting minutes. As an adjacent property owner, you have a right to request those documents, to ensure their development isn't adversely affecting your property values. The corner of his mouth twitched. It would be interesting to see how they're accounting for a building being constructed on land they don't own. A new front in our war had just opened up. The next day, I drafted a formal, polite letter to the Whispering Pines HOA Board of Directors, citing the relevant state statutes and requesting copies of all meeting minutes, financial statements, and construction-related contracts for the past 12 months. I sent it via certified mail. The response was a letter from Karen denying my request on the grounds that I was not a member of the HOA and therefore had no right to their internal documents. It was another perfect, predictable, and legally stupid move. She had just denied a lawful request in writing. It was another gift, another exhibit for our growing collection. Marcus was ecstatic when I told him. She's creating a paper trail of her own corruption. We'll subpoena those records, and her refusal to provide them now will be seen by a judge as an admission that she has something to hide. But Arthur had another idea. She may have stonewalled you, but she can't stonewall the entire community. He had a friend who lived inside Whispering Pines, a quiet woman named Carol who was fed up with Karen's leadership but was too intimidated to speak up. Arthur explained the situation to her, and Carol, armed with her legal rights as a dues-paying member, made the exact same request for documents. Karen couldn't deny a resident. A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived at Arthur's house, delivered by Carol after dark like a clandestine drop. We spread the contents on my table. It was a treasure trove: monthly financial reports, minutes from every board meeting, and copies of the contracts. Arthur's eyes lit up as he scanned the financial statements. "Oh my," he said softly. "Oh, this is very, very bad for them." The clubhouse project, originally budgeted at $250,000, was already ballooning past $400,000. There were massive, unexplained payments to a contractor I'd never seen on site. There were special assessments levied against the homeowners that were vaguely described as community improvement initiatives. But the most damning document was the one we were looking for: the survey. It was, as Dave had predicted, a chop shop job. A quick, cheap survey done by a company I'd never heard of, a company that, after a quick online search, turned out to have had its license suspended in 2 neighboring states. And the survey itself was a joke. It looked like the surveyor had simply drawn a new line where Karen wanted it to be, completely ignoring the historical markers in county records. It was fraudulent on its face. We now had it all: the evidence of the trespass, the pattern of harassment, the financial mismanagement, and the fraudulent document they had used as a pretext. Our alliance had armed us with a multi-pronged attack. I would lead with the property lawsuit, and Arthur and Carol would be prepared to launch a follow-up attack from within, exposing the financial malfeasance to the other homeowners. We were no longer just a few angry neighbors. We were a coordinated force. And all the while, the clubhouse neared completion, its fresh coat of beige paint gleaming in the sun, a monument to an arrogance that was about to come crashing down to earth. The final weeks of construction were a blur of activity at the clubhouse site, a frantic push to meet the deadline for the grand opening gala Karen had been promoting for months in the HOA newsletter. I watched on my cameras as they installed a commercial-grade kitchen, complete with stainless steel appliances. I saw them unboxing leather sofas and flat-screen televisions for the lounge area. They even installed a bronze plaque by the front door: the Whispering Pines Community Center, a testament to the vision of President Karen Miller. I had to give her credit for the sheer audacity. She was literally carving her name onto a building she had stolen. The invitations for the gala went out to all the HOA residents. Carol, our inside source, brought one over. It was printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock with embossed gold lettering. A night of celebration, it proclaimed. There would be a catered dinner, a live band, and a champagne toast led by Karen herself to christen the new facility. The date was set for a Saturday evening, 3 weeks away. That was our deadline, our D-Day. Marcus Thorne called for a final pre-action briefing in his office. Me, Arthur, and my wife Sarah sat across from him as he laid out the final plan of attack. "The trap is set," he said, his voice low and intense. "They have fully committed. The asset, the building, is at its maximum value. Their financial and emotional investment is total. Now we spring it." He pointed to a calendar. "The gala is on the 21st. On the morning of the 20th, a process server will deliver the summons and complaint to Karen Miller personally. A second server will do the same for every member of the HOA board at their homes. Simultaneously, a third representative from my office will post a notice of eviction and a lis pendens on the front door of the clubhouse itself." A lis pendens, he explained, was a public notice that the property was subject to a pending lawsuit, effectively making it impossible for them to sell or transfer the title. It would be a public branding of their crime. This will create maximum chaos and psychological shock 24 hours before their moment of triumph, Marcus continued, a glint in his eye. The lawsuit itself will be a masterpiece. We are asking for the full quiet title to the property, the ejectment of the HOA, and the forfeiture of the structure they built on it. In the alternative, if the judge for some reason doesn't grant us the building, We are asking for 3 times the value of the land they seized, plus the full cost of the building's demolition and removal, plus punitive damages to the tune of $1 million for their malicious and fraudulent conduct. Arthur whistled softly. 1 million? It's an opening bid, Marcus said with a shrug, but given the evidence of her harassment campaign against you and your neighbors and the flagrantly fraudulent survey, it's not an unreasonable one. We need to make it hurt. We need to send a message that this kind of behavior has consequences. The 2 weeks leading up to the 20th were the longest of my life. The temptation to do something, to say something, was immense. Karen was in full glorious pre-victory mode. She was constantly at the clubhouse, bossing around the caterers and event planners, a whirlwind of smug satisfaction. She had a new sign installed at the entrance to the development, Whispering Pines, an award-winning community. I had no idea what award she was talking about, but it was clear she had already given herself one. The day before the strike, I did one final walk of my property line, the real one, marked by Dave's bright orange stakes. I stood there looking at the gleaming new building, the manicured lawn, the cheerful petunias planted in the flower beds. It was so surreal. It was a complete functioning facility, ready for a party, and it was all sitting in the middle of my hayfield. My anger had long since cooled into something harder and more resolute. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about the principle that you cannot just take what isn't yours. It was for my grandfather, for the Hendersons and their gnomes, for Arthur and his mailbox. It was for every person who had ever been bullied by a petty tyrant drunk on a tiny sliver of power. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying the coming moment in my head, imagining the look on Karen's face. I worried about something going wrong, a last-minute legal maneuver, a flaw in our plan. But I trusted Marcus. I trusted our evidence. I trusted the cold, hard logic of the law. The enemy had walked into the trap, fat, dumb, and happy. It was time to pull the trigger. The morning of Friday the 20th broke clear and bright, a painfully beautiful day for an execution. I was parked in my truck a quarter-mile down the road from the entrance to Whispering Pines, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had a direct line to Marcus, who was coordinating the operation from his office. He had 3 different process servers on deck. Server 1 is approaching the target residence. Marcus's voice crackled over the phone. Server 2 and 3 are 5 minutes out from the other board members' homes. The posting team is on standby, waiting for confirmation of service on Miller. I watched through binoculars as a nondescript sedan pulled up in front of Karen's house. A man in a simple polo shirt and slacks got out, holding a large envelope. He walked up the driveway just as Karen emerged from her front door, dressed in a vibrant pink tracksuit and holding a steaming mug of coffee. She was probably on her way to the clubhouse to oversee the final party preparations. The server approached her. I saw him speak. I saw her wave a dismissive hand, clearly annoyed at being bothered. Then he held out the envelope. She refused to take it. He said something else, then simply dropped the envelope at her feet. Service is complete, the server's voice said over the radio feed Marcus had patched me into. Subject was identified and served. Go, 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 Marcus commanded. All units, deliver your packages. Posting team, you are cleared to proceed to the clubhouse. I started my truck and drove slowly toward the scene of the crime. By the time I reached the turnoff for the clubhouse, another sedan was already there. A young man and woman, both dressed professionally, were walking towards the grand entrance. The man was holding a hammer and a packet of documents, the woman a camera. As I watched, the man took out a large, brightly colored sheet of paper, the notice of eviction, and hammered it squarely into the center of the freshly painted front door. He then posted the list pendants next to it. The woman took photos from multiple angles, documenting the posting. At that exact moment, Karen's car, a pristine white Lexus SUV, came squealing around the corner. She must have picked up the papers from her driveway and read the first page. She slammed on her brakes, her car lurching to a stop in the middle of the road. She burst out of the driver's side, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a sight to behold. Her face was blotchy and red, her eyes wide with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice echoing across the quiet morning. "Who are you? Get off this property!" The young man from Marcus's office simply turned to her, his expression impassive. "Ma'am, this building is on private property belonging to our client, Mr. Jack Riley. This is a legal notice to vacate the premises. You have also been served with a lawsuit. I would advise you to contact your legal counsel." He and his partner then turned, got back in their car, and drove away, leaving Karen standing there, vibrating with impotent fury. She stared at the notices nailed to her beautiful door, then looked up and saw my truck, parked on the road just outside the entrance. Our eyes met. The smugness was gone. The condescension was gone. All that was left was the raw, ugly shock of someone who had been utterly and completely outmaneuvered. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You!" she screamed. "You did this! I will destroy you!" I didn't say a word. I just gave her the same slow, unblinking stare I had given her weeks ago. Then I gave her a slow, deliberate nod, the same one I'd given her when she thought I was surrendering. This time she understood what it meant. It meant checkmate. I put my truck in gear and drove away, leaving her there with the ruins of her grand vision, the sound of her screeching fading behind me. The gala was, of course, canceled. The news spread through the community like a shockwave. Phones started ringing. The other board members, having been served at their own homes, descended on the clubhouse in a panic. I could only imagine the scene. A gaggle of terrified, clueless suburbanites staring at a multi-$100,000 building they had just been evicted from. The war was over. The mopping up operation was about to begin. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. By noon, the first local news van had arrived. Someone inside the HOA, likely one of the panicked board members who suddenly realized their personal assets were on the line, had leaked the story. The headline on the local news website that afternoon was a thing of beauty. "Local veteran sues HOA for building clubhouse on his land." The story framed it as a classic David versus Goliath narrative. The humble serviceman returning home to find his family inheritance stolen by a power-mad HOA president. I agreed to one on-camera interview, which I conducted from my own property line, with the offending clubhouse looming in the background. I was calm, factual, and sympathetic. I spoke about my grandfather, about my service, and about the simple principle of property rights. I never once raised my voice or spoke ill of Karen directly. I let the facts speak for themselves. "I just want what's mine," I said simply, looking into the camera. "And I want to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Karen, on the other hand, gave a masterclass in how to immolate oneself in public. She held an impromptu press conference in front of the clubhouse, the eviction notice still visible on the door behind her. It was a train wreck. She was visibly agitated, her voice shrill and defensive. She accused me of being selfish and un-American, for putting my own interests above those of the community. She claimed the lawsuit was a frivolous shakedown and that I was trying to extort the good people of Whispering Pines. "This man is no hero," she declared, her voice cracking. "A real patriot would have been proud to donate this unused land for the betterment of his neighbors." The backlash was instantaneous. The news station's website and social media pages were flooded with comments supporting me. Veterans groups from across the state shared the story, expressing their outrage. The narrative she tried to spin, of the greedy veteran versus the benevolent community, had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. But the real bombshell was yet to come. With the lawsuit public and the HOA's dirty laundry aired, Arthur and Carol decided it was time to deploy their own weapon. Arthur had spent weeks meticulously analyzing the financial documents Carol had procured. He had found a pattern of gross mismanagement, cost overruns, and, most damningly, a series of large payments to a shell corporation that he traced back to Karen's brother-in-law. The fraudulent survey, the construction contracts, the special assessments, it was all a corrupt scheme to enrich her own family at the homeowner's expense. Arthur compiled his findings into a detailed, easy-to-read report, complete with copies of the incriminating documents. Carol distributed it to every single homeowner in Whispering Pines. The community, which had been simmering with discontent under Karen's rule, erupted. An emergency homeowners meeting was called. I wasn't there, of course, but I heard about it from Carol afterward. It was a bloodbath. Homeowners who had been fined for trivial offenses, who had been cowed into silence for years, finally found their voice. They waved copies of Arthur's report, demanding answers. The other board members, seeing the angry mob and realizing Karen had led them off a legal and financial cliff, immediately turned on her. They threw her under the bus, claiming they had been misled, that they had no idea about the property line dispute or the financial irregularities. By the end of the meeting, Karen was removed as president by a unanimous vote of no confidence. The HOA, now under the control of a terrified and shell-shocked interim board, immediately instructed their lawyers to seek a settlement. Marcus received the call the next morning. "They're waving the white flag," he told me, a note of triumph in his voice. "They're offering to pay for the land and give you a formal apology." I considered it for a moment, but it wasn't enough. An apology wouldn't undo the arrogance. A check wouldn't erase the principle of the matter. "No," I told Marcus. "No settlement. We're going to court. I don't want their money. I want the building." Marcus was silent for a second, then let out a low chuckle. "I was hoping you'd say that." The public humiliation was just the beginning of Karen's downfall. Her reign was over, but her punishment was just getting started. The legal proceedings were, in the end, brutally swift. The HOA's lawyers, facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence and a client in complete disarray, knew they had a losing hand. Their only hope was to mitigate the damage. But Marcus Thorne was not in a mitigation mood. He was in a destruction mood. The key event was the deposition. Karen was legally required to answer questions under oath, and Marcus had been looking forward to it like a kid looks forward to Christmas. I was allowed to sit in on the session. Karen arrived with a new, high-priced lawyer, looking pale and diminished. The vibrant tracksuits were gone, replaced by a drab gray pantsuit. The fire was gone from her eyes, replaced by a haunted, defensive fear. Marcus began slowly, calmly, establishing the basic facts. Then, he moved in for the kill. He presented her with the certified county plat map. "Mrs. Miller, this is the official, recorded map of the properties in question. Can you please show me where the Whispering Pines community property ends and where Mr. Riley's property begins?" She stared at it, flustered. "Well, our survey showed." "I'm not asking about your survey, Mrs. Miller. I'm asking about the legally filed plat map. Please show the court." She couldn't. The line was clear. She mumbled something about it being outdated. Then Marcus produced the fraudulent survey she had commissioned. "Is this the survey you used to justify construction?" "Yes," she said a little more confidently. "This is the one we relied on." "Are you aware," Marcus continued, his voice dropping, "that the surveyor who signed this, a Mr. Gene Haskins, had his license suspended for professional misconduct, including falsifying survey documents, 6 months before you hired him?" The color drained from Karen's face. Her lawyer immediately objected, but the damage was done. Marcus then moved on to the letters. He produced the violation notice she had sent me for my lawn and my truck. "Mrs. Miller, you sent my client this notice, demanding he adhere to HOA standards on his own private property, correct?" "It was an eyesore," she snapped. "So while you were in the process of illegally seizing an acre of his land to build a structure, you were simultaneously fining him for the appearance of the land you hadn't yet stolen? Is that correct?" She began to unravel, contradicting herself, blaming the other board members, blaming the surveyor, blaming me. But the final, most devastating blow came when Marcus brought up her conversation with me. "Mrs. Miller, do you recall telling my client, a 15-year combat veteran, that his property line was a suggestion?" She froze. I don't recall the exact words." "Oh, I think you do," Marcus said softly, "because it goes to the heart of your intent. It shows that you knew there was a discrepancy, that you knew it was his property, and you decided to take it anyway because you believed your authority as HOA president gave you the right. You believed you were the law." She had no answer. She just sat there broken. The judge didn't even need a full trial. Marcus filed a motion for summary judgment, arguing that there were no facts in dispute. The evidence was so overwhelming that a trial would be a waste of time. The judge agreed. In his ruling, he eviscerated the HOA and Karen. He called their actions a shocking and flagrant display of corporate arrogance and a willful disregard for the fundamental principles of property law. He granted our motion for quiet title, declaring me the undisputed owner of the land. And then came the hammer blow. He ruled that under the legal principle of trespass by encroachment, where the trespasser acted in bad faith, the structure built on the land, the clubhouse, was now legally mine. The HOA was ordered to vacate the premises immediately. They had built me a free clubhouse. The judgment also left the door open for the other homeowners to sue Karen and the board members personally to recoup their losses from the special assessments in the now worthless project. And he referred the matter of the fraudulent survey and the financial records to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. Karen's downfall was total. She was publicly disgraced, facing financial ruin from civil suits, and was now the subject of a criminal probe. It was a complete and total victory, more satisfying than I could have ever imagined. The aftermath was a strange, quiet affair. The once bustling construction site fell silent. The Whispering Pines HOA, now bankrupt and leaderless, was a ghost ship. Within a month, a for sale sign went up in front of Karen's house. I saw her once, loading boxes into a U-Haul, her face drawn and tired. She didn't look at me. The petty tyrant was gone, replaced by a defeated woman who had lost everything because she couldn't stand for anyone to have something that she couldn't control. The HOA was forced into receivership. To pay their legal debts and the lawsuits from their own members, they had to liquidate their assets. The problem was, their biggest asset was a brand new clubhouse they didn't own. The irony was thick enough to choke on. The new court-appointed board approached me, humbled and desperate. They offered to buy the land under the clubhouse from me. I politely declined. They offered to pay to have the building moved. I showed them the quote from a structural moving company. It was nearly as much as the building cost to construct. They were trapped. Finally, their only option was to declare bankruptcy. The clubhouse and all its brand new furnishings went up for auction as part of the settlement to pay off creditors. And I was there, paddle in hand. There weren't many other bidders. Who would want to buy a building they couldn't access without trespassing? In the end, I bought the entire $250,000 facility, complete with its kitchen, furniture, and big screen TVs, for the grand sum of $10,000, which was little more than the cost to cover some of the HOA's outstanding legal fees to my lawyer. The victory was not just legal, it was now physical and absolute. I stood on the deck of my new clubhouse looking out over my land. The bronze plaque bearing Karen's name was the first thing to go. I took it down myself, a small, satisfying act of erasure. But what to do with the building? Sarah and I talked about it. We could have used it as a ridiculously oversized party barn. We could have rented it out. But that didn't feel right. This whole battle had been about more than just land. It was about community versus tyranny, about justice for the little guy. An idea started to form, inspired by the network of veterans like Dave and Marcus who had helped me. I made some calls. I met with local chapters of the VFW and the American Legion. These organizations were always looking for good, modern places to meet, to offer services, to build camaraderie for a new generation of veterans. 6 months later, we had our own grand opening. There was no champagne, no live band, just a grill loaded with burgers and hot dogs, a cooler full of beer, and 100 or so veterans from all branches and all eras. Arthur and the Hendersons were there as honored guests. I stood on the deck, in the same spot where Karen had planned to give her triumphant speech, and looked out at the crowd. I saw Dave, my surveyor, laughing with a young Marine who had just returned from Afghanistan. I saw Marcus Thorne, my lawyer, swapping stories with a Vietnam-era Navy corpsman. This building, born from an act of theft and arrogance, had been transformed. It was no longer a monument to one woman's ego. It was a sanctuary, a place for healing, for support, for community, a real community, one forged in shared sacrifice, not enforced by binders and bylaws. I took down the old Whispering Pines sign and put up a new one, carved from a solid piece of oak. It read simply, "The Sentinel Post, all are welcome." Justice, I had learned, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about restoration. It's about taking something that was meant for greed and selfishness and turning it into something good. And as I watched the sun set over my grandfather's land, I knew he would have approved. We had held the line.